Welcome back to the next session in A4S's Summit. And for the next 45 minutes, we're going to be exploring how we can inspire change to really accelerate the kind of actions that we need to see. So we've explored in the last session, we are on a trajectory towards climate breakdown and collapse of biodiversity and nature. And although there's greater awareness, the pace of the response isn't yet reflected in the kind of actions being taken by business, finance, and governments. So in this session, we want to explore those challenges, but also how we can communicate more effectively to mobilize action and what each of us as individuals can do about it. I'm really pleased to welcome Katharine Hayhoe to share some of her insights and help us think through this challenge and what we can do. So Katharine is an atmospheric scientist whose research focuses on understanding what climate change means for people and the places we live. She's chief scientist at the Nature Conservancy, a large global charity, and a distinguished professor at Texas Tech University. She's author of the book Saving Us, a climate scientist's case for hope and healing in a divided world, and has given a TED Talk with over 4 million views. Katharine's also been named one of Times's 100 most influential people and is also UN Champion of the Environment. So she brings a huge amount of insight to us. Katharine, it is fantastic to have you with us. To get us going, can you just set the scene and talk through some of the trends that you've seen and the challenges that we face?
Yes, I absolutely can. I want to begin not with climate science per se, but with a brief history of how we got here in the first place. If we look at world population, we see that it was increasing gradually for many millennia until just recently, the last 200 years, it began to increase exponentially. And when we dig in a little deeper to our lifespan, we see that just 200 years ago, which was within the lifetime of most of our great-grandparents, the average lifespan of someone born in the UK, which at that time was one of the most developed countries in the world, was a mere 40 years. Today, that number has nearly doubled. And the biggest reason for the increase in human well-being over the last 200 years is the dawn of the industrial era, when we figured out how to dig up coal and then later on natural gas and oil from the ground and burn it. We were able to power things that we take for granted these days: refrigeration, electricity, transportation, even medical advances. Without fossil fuels, our lives would be very different than they are today. But in all of these advances, we have ended up creating the very crises that we're experiencing today. We are currently experiencing a pollution crisis. 1 out of every 5 deaths around the world occurs because of breathing in the particulate matter caused by burning fossil fuels. 1 out of 5. And then there's the biodiversity crisis. Populations of mammals, insects, and more are plummeting as humans have spread across the planet due to our unsustainable use and management of lands. And then we have the climate crisis, which is caused by digging up and burning coal, gas, and oil that produces heat-trapping gases that are building up in the atmosphere, wrapping a blanket of carbon pollution around our planet. About 78% of these heat-trapping gases come from fossil fuel combustion and industry, and about 22% from deforestation and agriculture, especially large-scale industrial agriculture. As a result of all of this accumulated emissions of heat-trapping gases that have been building up over the last few decades and even centuries, the world is currently warming at an unprecedented rate. Over the entire course of human civilization, we have never seen temperatures increasing this quickly. And as far back as we can go in the history of the planet, we have never seen this much carbon going to the atmosphere this quickly. The closest analogy, 55 million years ago, our best estimate is that about 1/10 1/10, 10% of the carbon that we're producing today was going in at that period of most rapid warming 55 million years ago. So it is no exaggeration to say that we are conducting an unprecedented experiment with our only home. Now, many refer to the outcome of this experiment as global warming because scientists like me, we use global average temperature as one of the main indicators of how quickly the planet's climate is changing. But I often prefer to refer to this as global weirding because wherever we live, climate change is loading the weather dice against us. It's making our heat wave season longer, an individual heat wave stronger, more intense, more dangerous. It's increasing the area burned by wildfires. It's making droughts stronger. It's supersizing hurricanes, cyclones, and typhoons that draw their energy from warm ocean water. It's powering stronger atmospheric rivers that dump more rain, and it's increasing the frequency of heavy rainfall as well. Wherever we live, our weather is getting weirder, and all you have to do is just look at the headlines any given week to see the headlines on emergency floods in Brazil or Pakistan, heat waves in Spain or China, or what's happening to us right here at home. Today, as scientists, we can even put a number on how much worse climate change is making these events. In the case of the deadly floods in Germany in 2021, 7 times more likely. The heat wave across British Columbia and the Pacific Northwest that same year, 150 times more likely. And why do we care about any of these events? It's because they are affecting the food that we eat, the quantity and the quality. They're affecting the water that we drink, the infrastructure, the buildings, the roads, the systems that we all depend on, the nature that surrounds us, whether on land or in the sea. It's not about saving the planet. The planet will be orbiting the sun long after we're gone. It is quite literally a case of saving us. And I have an asterisk there on the us because I want to be clear. I mean us humans and every other living thing on this planet. Nature does not need us. We need it. More than half the oxygen we breathe comes from tiny phytoplankton in the ocean, for goodness sakes. We cannot survive without all of the living things that inhabit this planet together. So it truly is a matter of saving us. Now, some people might say, well, climate change is your issue, but I care about different issues. Climate change is a threat multiplier. In other words, it takes other issues like hunger, poverty, inequity, economic health, geopolitical security, and it makes them worse. The way I think about it is climate change is like the hole in the bucket. Whatever bucket you're trying to fill, whether it's providing sustainable livelihoods for people, education for children, gender equality for women, whatever it is that you care about, that you're invested in, climate change is making it more difficult for you to meet your goals. And so that's why to care about climate change, you don't have to be a certain type of person. You don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be an advocate. You don't have to be an activist. You simply have to be someone who lives on planet Earth, who breathes the air, drinks the water, eats the food. And you know what? That means every single one of us is the perfect person to care. That message is getting across. A recent survey asking people, are you worried about climate change around the world, found that the majority of people are worried about climate change. And this is important because worry wakes us up. If we weren't worried about it, we wouldn't be seeking a solution, right? But alone, it is not enough. In addition to a catastrophe to avoid, which I have outlined so far, we also need a better future to move towards and a pathway to get there. Without that better future, without that hope that our actions could make a difference, what is the point of doing anything? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, some may say. And in fact, some are saying that today. But I know as a scientist, without a shadow of a doubt, that every action matters. Every bit of warming we avoid will also avoid a concurrent amount of suffering. And so for that, we can fight, but we need to know not just what we're fighting against, but what we're fighting for. So what do climate solutions look like? Well, when it comes to climate solutions, I'm convinced we truly do have that good news to share. We truly do have something positive to move forwards to, not only something negative to avoid. If we look at climate and biodiversity and pollution solutions, there are solutions that not only address the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and the pollution crisis, they also give us cleaner air and cleaner water. They also protect us from disasters. These same solutions can improve our physical and our mental health. They can provide us with energy that is more affordable than what we have today, not less. They reduce inequality rather than increasing it, create healthier ecosystems and food systems, give us a world that is safer and better and more secure than the one we have today, not one that is worse. This is what we have to gain from acting on climate change. We need this message just as much as we need to understand what we are going to lose. Now, what do these solutions actually look like? Well, there's no single solution that alone is enough to fix the whole problem, because these emissions come from all different parts of the economy, so there's no one solution that would address it all. If anyone tells you this is the silver bullet solution, view them with suspicion, because there is no such magic solution. One size fits all. But the good news is that there is a plethora of solutions that when we put them together, offer us more than enough of what we need to fix this at scale. And I think of these solutions as occurring in 3 different groups that I explain using the metaphor of a pool. So if you look at this pool, the level of water in the pool is the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And before the Industrial Revolution, we had just the right amount of heat-trapping gases in our atmosphere, water in the pool, so to speak, that our toes could just touch the ground. But at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we put a giant hose in the swimming pool, and we've been turning it up every year. The first year of the pandemic, we turned it down 7%, and then we turned it right back up again. So what's the first thing we need to do? The first thing we need to do is turn off the hose. How? Through efficiency. We are so wasteful with our energy, and the cheapest form of energy is the energy we don't use. Yes, then through clean energy as well. Of course, we need sources of energy that do not produce heat-trapping gases. We need solutions that turn off the hose in the land use and agricultural sectors. We need to use behavioral change to turn off the hose. And for the last few drops that are really hard to turn off, that's where we need the expensive and energy-intensive technology like carbon capture and storage for those last few drops. But we also have a drain in our pool, and we can make that drain bigger. Much of that drain consists of nature. Nature can take up to 25% of our carbon emissions out of the atmosphere and put it back into soil and ecosystems where we want it instead of the atmosphere where we have too much. What do nature-based solutions look like? Well, the first one is not planting trees. The first one is protecting what we already have. The amount of carbon in old growth forests, for example, is much higher than the amount of carbon in new growth. We need to restore ecosystems that have become degraded, coastal wetlands, grasslands, and more. We do need to regenerate ecosystems that have been cut down. That's where the tree planting comes in. But there's also a big space for climate-smart agriculture that puts those carbon emissions back in the ground where we want them again. And for the last few drops down the drain, so to speak, energy-intensive and expensive technologies like direct air capture also have a role to play. Net zero simply means that what's coming out the hose equals what's going down the drain. But there's one more thing we have to do. The level of water in the pool is so high that many people's toes can no longer touch the ground. We need to learn how to swim and to enable others to swim too. That is adaptation and resilience. And there's so many pieces too. We can use technology to help us adapt. Infrastructure needs to be adapted to this changing climate that it was never built for in the first place. We can use nature again to help us adapt. And we can help people adapt through social adaptation too. My favorite solutions are the win-win-win solutions, the solutions that address multiple parts of the swimming pool at the same time. Like what? Like, for example, low-income neighborhoods in big cities are often subject to much higher levels of pollution and are much hotter during heat waves than high-income neighborhoods in the same city. And lack of tree cover and green space is the number one reason. So when we green these neighborhoods, we are filtering the air pollution out of the air. That's what trees do. We are cooling during heat waves. We're providing a place for floodwaters to go when it rains. We're improving people's physical and mental health. We're addressing issues of not only health, but socioeconomic inequality also. And then, of course, as those trees grow, they actually do take up a little bit of carbon too. I mean, how many winds is that? We're already at about 5. There are so many solutions to provide people with energy that is more affordable, addressing energy inequality and energy poverty, while investing in women entrepreneurs and solar energy, like Solar Sisters does in Africa. When we look for these win-win-win solutions, there is enough to go around for everyone to make our cities healthier, our well-being improved, our health better, to reduce the inequality, and even to save us money. One Oxford study a couple of years ago found that decarbonizing the energy system by 2050 could save up to $12 trillion. Nature-based markets are valued at $7 trillion. When we look at all these solutions, we realize there's so much we can do. The only question I have left is, what are we waiting for? It's literally our future that is in our hands, and the choice is up to us. Are we going to fight for a better future for all of us and our children together, or not? And as I said, if we're a human being living on this planet, I think the answer is clear. The answer is yes.
Fantastic. So I think that has really set out the scale of the challenge, and it can feel really, I think as an individual, really overwhelming. So can you just say a bit more about the kind of actions that you recommend, or the kind of questions that you get, just to help people grapple with that, what can be really overwhelming?
So as we just saw, the scale of this crisis is truly unprecedented. And we do have the large-scale solutions we need to take action. But that means that the next most obvious question that most of us have these days, no matter who I speak with, whether it's where I live in the US, whether it's where I'm from in Canada, whether I'm speaking to anyone from the UK or the EU or further abroad, the number one question I hear these days is, what can I do? And typically when people ask me that question, especially in high-income countries where we have a very significant carbon footprint, they're expecting me to give them a list of personal behaviors that we can change. And now there's no question that those of us who live in high-income countries have a lot of room to reduce our carbon footprint. But when it comes to catalyzing societal change, the most effective thing that any of us can do has nothing to do with our personal carbon footprint, and everything to do with how we advocate for and influence change around us. So let me explain. If as a climate scientist, I know a lot about what I can do, and I have taken many steps to reduce my personal carbon footprint as well, as has my colleague Stefan Rahmstorf, for example, a well-known oceanographer at the Potsdam Institute in Germany. And Stefan was so dedicated to reducing his personal carbon footprint that when he was doing his PhD in New Zealand back in the 1980s, he didn't ever fly home, not even once, not even for his sister's wedding. That's how dedicated he was. Yet when we were speaking just the other day, he said, I've realized that although I bike to work, I live a very low carbon lifestyle, I realized that personally, I can only reduce 50% of my carbon emissions. And he lives in a country that makes it very easy compared to where I live in the state of Texas in the United States. So if all of us who had the knowledge, who had the time, who had the money to make the best choices to reduce our carbon footprint in every way that we could did, that would have an impact, don't get me wrong, but it wouldn't reduce more than about 20% of the problem. And the challenge is that the best solution is still the most difficult and the most expensive often. And what we need the best solution to be the easiest and the most affordable. We need public transportation or biking or walking to be the easiest and fastest way to get where we're going. If those are not available, we need electric cars to be more affordable than internal combustion engines. We need, as we already have, since we're doing this today ourselves, we need virtual meetings to be much easier and much more common than in-person meetings. We need to change the way we live, the way we eat, the way we travel. And for that, we have to change the system. And so I realized, looking to history, that we have seen major societal changes in the past. The abolition of slavery, women getting the vote, the civil rights movement in the United States, the end of apartheid in South Africa. Now, think back to abolition in the UK and in Canada. Did abolitionists boycott sugar and cotton? They absolutely did. That was a personal action people could take that was consistent with their values. But was that what led to the abolition of slavery? No, it was when they used their voices and they advocated again and again and again in the face of ridicule and defeat and what seemed like impossible odds. But finally, they prevailed. And so that is what gives me the conviction today that we too can prevail against societal barriers as large as those faced by many people in the past. But we can only do so if we realize the most important thing that every one of us can do, the most important tool that we all have, is our voice. To advocate for change wherever we live, wherever we work, whatever circles or organizations we are part of, how will they change if no one calls for that change? And if no one is calling, or if not enough people are, how can we not add our voice to that in order to accelerate and catalyze that change just a little bit faster?
I think that that's really interesting and really resonates with some of the work that we've done. Often it can be that systems-wide change, and you need change to happen everywhere all at once at unprecedented pace and scale. And that's not going to happen by everyone working in their own little way, no matter how important and powerful some of those smaller changes might still be. It's the systems-wide change. So when you're talking about people raising their voice, how can they do that in the most effective way? You know, you spend a lot of your time communicating and talking about the science and how we can mobilize a response. So what are your tips for us and for everyone listening?
Well, often when I say the most important thing that we can do about climate change is talk about it, and I think it's so important, that's literally the title of my TED Talk, people often automatically think, oh, I finally have the tools now to go out and speak with Uncle Joe or my neighbor who supports Brexit and thinks that climate change is a hoax. And unfortunately, there's a small percent of the population. In the United States, it's about 11%. In Canada, it's about a similar numbers. In the UK, I'd put it at maybe 5 to 8%. There's a small but very loud and very significant part of the population who does think that climate change is a hoax. And honestly, I believe it takes a miracle to change their minds. But I don't think we have to, because most people, over 3/4 of people in the UK and in North America too, are worried about climate change. Let that sink in. Again, I live in the state of Texas, where you might think is synonymous with the oil and gas industry. Yet, even in the state of Texas, 42% of registered Republican voters are worried about climate change, and 92% of registered Democrat voters, Republicans being the conservatives and Democrats being the liberals. So the world is changing, and most people are worried, but they don't know what to do. It's all in our heads. All of the facts about the ice sheets melting and the ocean circulation slowing, all of the crises I just spoke about, we know, and most of us are worried, but we don't know what to do. And we haven't made what I think of as the most important connections we need to in order to have these conversations. We haven't connected our head to our heart, and we haven't connected our heart to our hands. What do I mean by that? Well, we understand that this is a crisis, but we don't understand often how it affects my life, my home, my family, the things I care about. We haven't made the head to heart connection. We haven't brought it home. Now, increasingly, the increase in severe weather I talked about is bringing it home. The number of people whose homes and livelihoods are exposed to and vulnerable to these increasing global weirding is on the rise. And that's forcing the head to heart connection. But we need to make it even faster in order to spur action. But then once we've made the head to heart connection, we have to make the heart to hands connection. What can I do where I live, in my town, in my job, in my organization I'm part of? How can I be part of the solution at a bigger scale? So when we have these conversations, then our goal is not to convince that one person we know that this is real. Our goal is not to dump more fear-based facts on people who are already worried, even if they don't want to talk about it. In fact, many people who are worried do not want to talk about it because they don't want more worry if they don't know what they can do about it. So our goal is to start from the heart, to start with something we have in common, something we share, an activity we enjoy, the place we live, the fact that we're both parents, we're both members of a similar organization, we both belong to the same faith. Whatever it is, begin with what we have in common, not what divides us. Connect the dots to how climate change is affecting what we both care about. And then always, always bring in positive, constructive solutions that are already being done over here that maybe we could try. Something you might have done yourself in your personal life, that's where the carbon footprint comes in, that you want to make contagious by talking about it. Something a school, a university, a business, a city, a company is doing. Bring in those positive solutions, because social science has showed that doom and gloom gets the most clicks and shares online. But it is the absolute worst at encouraging people to act. Instead, we're encouraged and motivated to act when we realize that it's possible. And what shows us more clearly that it's possible than giving examples of many other people who are acting as well? That's the key to a successful conversation.
I think at the moment there is, as you say, that tension between worry and hope that I think everyone faces, and almost more and more desperation when you look at the near-term impacts from the climate crisis that we're already experiencing and living through. But then also, I think, worry that you're increasingly seeing that some of the solutions might have an impact as well. So how do you deal with both of those areas of worry? One that is pulling us in one direction, and the other that is pulling us in the other?
That is a great question. It's one that's very, very timely today. And first of all, I want to reiterate that worry has a purpose. If we're not worried about something, we don't understand the need to act. So worry is constructive and helpful if we know what to do about it. If we don't, then more worry will just paralyze us at a time when we need to act faster than ever. So I think of it as two sides of the coin. We need to understand it's bad. It's affecting all of us. It's not affecting us equally. It's affecting those who've done the least to contribute to the problem the worst. We need to do something about it. That's the first side of the coin. But then the second side of the coin is what is being done and what can be done. And now when it comes to the second side of the coin, we are seeing a new type of denial arising, a denial of solutions. Now, some who don't want to act are using the imperfection of solutions to say, well, we shouldn't do them anyways. But many who genuinely do want to act are paralyzed by the myth of a perfect solution. And when they understand that, well, for electric cars and for wind turbines, we need rare earth minerals, and rare earth minerals are often mined in very unsustainable ways. When they understand that, they think, oh, well, we can't do that. Then let's just keep on using fossil fuels until we have a better solution. The idea that there's a free energy lunch is a myth. I was on a panel with the director of the ITER, the big nuclear fusion experiment, just a few weeks ago. And although nuclear fusion could provide very abundant clean energy without any harmful emissions in the future, he said, it's not likely to be commercial at a large scale within our lifetime. So, and even nuclear fusion wouldn't supply all of our needs when it comes to climate because it provides the electricity, but we also have emissions from deforestation, emissions from agriculture, emissions from all kinds of other different sectors. So there is no free energy lunch. But what we have is we have an extremely expensive energy lunch. We have an energy lunch based on fossil fuels that is costing us over 8 million premature deaths a year from breathing in the particulates produced when we burn fossil fuels. We are dining on a lunch that is driving unprecedented amounts of climate change, as we saw. We've never seen climate changing this fast before. It could lead to the extinction of 30% of all species before the end of the century if we don't do something about it. It is putting our entire society in jeopardy. And so this is the price we are paying if we continue to depend on fossil fuels. If we transition to clean energy, we are still mining rare earth minerals, but you know how much mining occurs with fossil fuels? Like this much, as opposed to this much. Could we improve? Absolutely. Are they making batteries now that don't require cobalt, for example? Yes, they are. Are they figuring out how to conduct urban mining where we recycle our electronics which are much more dense in valuable minerals than the Earth itself? Are we figuring out how to do things in better ways constantly, every day, all the time? So the price of our clean energy lunch is going down every day, but it isn't free. And it's not going to be free for a very long time, but it is always, always going to be much more affordable than the fossil fuels that we've been dining on for the last 200 years, so to speak. And so this false dichotomy of, oh, there's some perfection out there, and until we reach perfection, we can't do anything, that will doom us. It is yet another delay myth. Whereas in reality, what is the arc of human progress? It's 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Sometimes 5 steps forward, 1 step back. Sometimes 1 step forward and 1 step back, but it's always moving towards something better. And that's exactly what we can do when it comes to climate solutions. We have no excuse at this point not to act, because we know the alternative is far more expensive. The disease is far worse than the cure.
And so I think that you've probably answered this question in that last response, but recently there was quite a lot of research looking at interviewing the climate scientist community from around the world and really understanding what some of their hopes and fears were. So from your perspective, I mean, you must get confronted by some of the challenges and the reality of those challenges every day. So what continues to give you hope and make you really focused on the possibility that we can respond to this crisis before it's too late?
So a number of weeks ago, The Guardian interviewed climate scientists and asked them a series of questions. And what's really important to realize is that climate scientists study the Earth, the atmosphere, the ocean, and the cryosphere, which is the ice on the planet. So if you want an expert opinion based on the science, we're the ones who will give you that. As we study what's changing, we, of course, have opinions, very strong opinions about what should be done and what is being done. But what that survey didn't realize is we are not the ones who determine those outcomes. So, for example, one of the questions asked climate scientists is, how warm will the Earth get as a result of human emissions? And I said in response, why are you asking the climate scientists? Because the number one uncertainty in how much change we'll continue to see that climate scientists have identified, we've identified what the number one uncertainty is. It's us, it's humans, not climate scientists. It is humans. And so if I wanted to know how much warmer the world would get, I would ask decision makers. I would ask CEOs. I would ask members of parliament. I would ask global leaders. I would ask city mayors. I would say, how much warmer is it going to get? And why are you going to allow it to get that high? Don't you understand how it's going to affect your supply chain, your infrastructure, the well-being of your area? They're the ones who are making the decision, not the climate scientists. And then another question they asked us was, what is the most important thing an individual can do to catalyze change? And with climate scientists, the number one answer was a very good answer, in my opinion, which is voting, using our voice to advocate for change. But what people don't realize is there's a lot more than only voting. Speaking to our elected officials, advocating for change, lobbying for change, that's a very important way to use our voice. But when I look to the most important things we can do, I look to the social scientists who have actually studied this. And there is science on what are the most effective things we can do. Using our voice to call for change where we work is right up there. Using our voice in terms of how we invest our money is also right up there. Engaging with politicians through how we vote, but also through how we communicate with them is up there as well. There are so many ways that we can, in the words of writer Bill McKibben, not be such an individual. He says the most important thing an individual can do is not be such an individual. And that relates to where we find hope as well. Because often we picture climate action as a giant boulder sitting at the bottom of an impossibly steep cliff with only a few hands on it. We've got Greta Thunberg, but she's very small. We've got Al Gore. He's been doing it for decades. He must be exhausted. We've got Sir David Attenborough, but that man, he's 95, 96 years old, and he produces a new documentary every 6 months. So he's busy doing other things with his other hand. And we think, well, they're pushing as hard as they can. And I'm, taking my reusable sack to the grocery store and I'm eating my plant-based meals, but I know that's not enough. And I feel like this boulder is never going to get up the hill. But when we engage with others around us And that engagement begins with communication, with using our voice to talk about why it matters and what we can do about it, the head and the hands. We realize we're not alone. In fact, that giant boulder is already at the top of the hill. It is already rolling down the hill in the right direction. It already has millions of hands on it. And if I add mine, and if I use my voice to encourage others around me to add theirs, it will go faster. And that sense that we are not alone, that action is happening and that I am part of it, that is what gives us hope. There is an intimate relationship between action and hope. And as Greta herself would say, the only thing that matters more than hope is action, because once you act, hope is all around you.
That's a really great, and I love that analogy of the boulder and the many hands on it. If I think of A4S, when His Majesty the King first set A4S up 20 years ago, it definitely felt that there were not many hands on that boulder. And the first question people were definitely asking was, you know, why is my hand even relevant to be putting anywhere close to that boulder? It's not, it's somebody else's job. It's not, I can't join the dots of what that means for me and my profession and my day-to-day role in work. But we've definitely seen that shift happening. So if we take that analogy of the boulder, it's gone up the hill, a lot of the heavy lifting, not all of the heavy lifting done, but with many hands, it is at the top and now potentially starting to roll down and gather pace on the other side. So hopefully that action will become easier and easier. But we do know that it's not happening fast enough and that we are running out of time. So can you share any thoughts of how we can keep that pace going and maybe accelerate it even further, particularly as you were saying with some of the solutions, sometimes it can be one step forward, one step back, or, you know, we still have challenges to overcome as we take action. So how can we maintain pace and accelerate?
Well, we absolutely have already made progress. And for example, before the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015, which was less than 10 years ago, the world was headed to 4 to 5 degrees Celsius before the end of the century. Now, thanks to policies already enacted, not the policies that are still promised, the ones already enacted, the world is heading towards about 2.7 to 3 degrees Celsius. Now, that's still too much, but it's a big difference from 4 to 5. And although the Paris targets agreed on 1.5, 2 at the most, those are not magic thresholds. What the science actually says is every bit of warming matters. It's sort of akin to the fact that there's no magic number of cigarettes you can smoke before you get lung cancer, right? Like imagine if we could smoke 9,999 cigarettes with no side effects. And as long as you don't smoke that last one, everything's fine. That's ridiculous. We know that every pack of cigarettes produces greater and greater risk. And in the same way, every bit of warming, every bit of carbon we produce increases our risk. So 1.5 and 2 degrees are not magic thresholds, but they are realistic goals for limiting the amount of warming to a level that would enable society, much, but not all of society, to continue to function. And what the science says is very clear. The lower we go, the better we are off. The faster we get there, the better we are. Now, some people say, well, isn't that a trade-off between people versus the planet or the economy versus the environment? Well, as I pointed out, it's not about saving the planet. The planet is going to be orbiting the sun long after we're gone. It's about us humans, and all the living things upon which our life depends. It's about saving ourselves. And when it comes to the economy versus the environment, well, 2 years ago at Oxford, they did a study that showed that transitioning the entire economy to clean energy would save at least $12 trillion worldwide by 2050. And the faster we do it, the more money we'll save. Nature itself is valued at $7 trillion a year. So there's opportunities to be made, but make no mistake, there are many who currently hold the power of, or the balance of power and wealth in this world, who will not be able to do so in the same way in a clean energy economy. And so in many places, including the place where I live, they are hanging on to that power and wealth as long as they can. Fossil fuels are subsidized to the tune of $7 trillion a year. That's almost $1,000 per person. So things are not moving fast enough because we still live in a world that is extremely skewed towards keeping us dependent on fossil fuels. So we need action at every level. We need action at the level of individual organizations, cities, companies, as well as countries. But we need these large-scale policy changes so that we can have, at least at minimum, a level playing field. And it would be even better if it was actually tipped in the direction of encouraging us to accelerate towards net zero, because right now we're still trying to push that boulder uphill, so to speak. So we need policy changes. And for that, again, our voice is absolutely essential. Our voice in voting at every level, not only the national level, at every level it matters. And having those conversations with decision makers at every level as well also matters. That is the lever, so to speak, that can help us accelerate change. And for those of us who live in societies where we are able to vote and we are able to voice our opinion, I believe we really have a responsibility to engage, because we're fighting not for our personal opinions. We're not fighting for our personal well-being. We are fighting for the future of everyone on this planet, especially those who don't have that voice and that ability to fight for it, yet are suffering the most impacts. I'm talking about people living in low-income countries, people living in low-income neighborhoods in the same city we are. I'm talking about our children and future generations who will live in the world that we have created. And I'm speaking about all of the living things that share this planet with us, who are suffering the impacts of our choices and our decisions. So those of us who have a voice, I think we need to use it.
And in terms of creating some of those positive tipping points that you've been talking about in society and across the world, at the same time, there are negative tipping points from the science perspective that quite a lot of focus has been on. So can you say a little bit more about how close some of those risks are, and again how that's not the thing that kind of really keeps you awake at night?
Well, those tipping points, those physical tipping points in the climate system, the negative tipping points, the vicious cycles, so to speak, they are what keep me and most other climate scientists awake at night. Because as I said, we've never seen climate change this fast. The most rapid time of warming, 55 million years ago, again, our best estimate is that 1/10 of the carbon was going into the atmosphere at that time from natural causes, as we humans are putting in today. So we are giving our planet a heftier kick than it has ever received, short of periods that in the past were known as extinctions. And those were caused by things like asteroids hitting the Earth, not by humans digging up and burning coal, gas, and oil. So this is very concerning because we know that there are tipping points in the climate system. And we see evidence that some of those tipping points are being engaged, such as Arctic sea ice melting, such as the ocean circulation in the Arctic that transports heat all the way up to Europe, slowing down thanks to freshwater inputs in the Arctic. We're seeing indications that some of these tipping points are being approached, but we don't know exactly when they're going to happen because we've never seen this precise set of initial conditions before. But what we do know for sure is that the faster and the greater the change, the more likely we'll reach those tipping points sooner. So the precautionary principle would tell us, and we would apply this in many other areas of our life, that if there's a very significant risk here, and if we're barreling towards it, so to speak, in our gas-powered car, our petrol-powered car, first of all, we need to take our foot off the accelerator, number one. Number two, we should hit the brake. And then number three, we should turn the car around and head in the opposite direction. So those are the simple steps that we need to do to avoid tipping points. And they might sound so simple, but because too many people have yet to make the head to heart to hands connection, we have a large number of people who are basically sitting in the passenger seat screaming as they see the tipping point approach. But they haven't figured out how to help take their foot off the gas, push the brake, and turn the car around. And we need that step, that heart to hands connection, because otherwise we'll be a planet full of worried people and we'll still be doomed.
think we're nearly out of time, but two more questions if I can. The first one is actually around the resilience side of the equation. So I think we already know that we're experiencing some of the changes already. And one of the questions we certainly get is how people can balance investment in resilience with climate action. Now, certainly my sense is that, again, as you said, it's not a choice between the two. We need to be doing a bit of and in some cases it can be win-wins, not always. So can you say a little bit more about how we can get ready for the change that we're already seeing?
So as I spoke about with the swimming pool analogy, we need to turn off the hose, make the drain bigger, and learn how to swim. And all three of those are climate actions. John Holdren is a physicist who served as the science advisor to President Obama, and he said something very relevant to this situation. He said, we have three choices. We can mitigate, which is reducing our emissions, including turning off the hose and making the drain bigger. We can adapt, that's learning how to swim, or we can suffer. And he said, we are going to do some of each. In fact, I would venture to say we are already doing some of each. But he said, the more we mitigate, reduce our emissions, the less adaptation is required and the less suffering there will be. And I think that puts a really good perspective on it, because it isn't only mitigation and adaptation. There is a third choice, or a third outcome, I should say. And because I wouldn't really call it a choice, because the people who are going to be suffering the most are not empowered to make that choice. So there's a third outcome, and that third outcome is suffering. And so we need to be doing all of the above. And that's why I am such a fan of win-win-win solutions. I love solutions that reduce our carbon emissions and take up carbon from the atmosphere and help make people more resilient. Like the solutions I talked about earlier that involve nature, greening cities to hit all three of those targets at the same time, investing in drought-resistant agriculture through agroforestry that also hits all three of those at the same time. There's so many incredible win-win-win solutions that we need to prioritize those, the ones that help us turn off the hose, make the drain bigger, learn how to swim, and address issues like justice and equity at the same time. Those solutions are all around us. We are nowhere near full implementation of all the triple or quadruple wins that we have. And that, I think, helps to address the should I be doing this or this? My answer to anybody who says, should I be doing X or Y, is yes.
Fantastic. So final question. If you just summarize all of the fantastic recommendations and insights that you've given us over the last 45 minutes or so into just one key takeaway that you wanted to leave the audience with, so that 20 years time, we would be looking back without regret and having realized the kind of world that we want to live in. What is your key takeaway?
I would say that our goal is not to solve the climate and the biodiversity and the pollution crises. Our goal is a better future. And don't we all want a better future for ourselves, for our children, for those we love, and the places that we're invested in? So that means that whoever we are, no matter where we live, no matter what language we speak, no matter what industry we work in, we are, each one of us, the perfect person to add our hand to the giant boulder to fight for that better world. Because like you said, when we get there, we will have no regrets. We will look back and we will simply say, what took us so long? What made us, what scales were on our eyes that we did not realize how much cleaner and healthier and safer this world could be if we address these challenges? So remember, it's not fighting against something, it's fighting for something. It's fighting for something that matters to all of us. There was a survey done in countries around the world that asked people, not only are you worried about climate change, but why do you want to act? And the number one answer from anyone, anywhere in the world, was I am motivated to act out of love.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Katharine. We really appreciate those insights and for you sharing them with our audience. I hope that that has really inspired people to think about how they can raise their voices and enable the kind of action to be taken that we need.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks again to Katharine for sharing that inspiration and some thoughts in terms of what we can each do. I look forward to welcoming you back for the next session after this, where we will be exploring financing the future and how the capital markets can overcome some of the barriers and accelerate adoption of solutions. So look forward to seeing you again then.